has been brought to you by the letter M.
Okay, we are all the way up to M. And M is one of those things that gets me so psyched about archaeology because it shows just what we can do with all this great modern technology. And what would M be? Microware analysis. And little did you know, we kind of touched on this recently with that story about that bear bone found in the cave in Poland, and also K for napping. Both of those dealt with microware analysis. Now, what is microware analysis? That's when we look very, very closely at the edge of something, at the surface of something, and look at clues for the most minute traces of wear and tear that give us hints to what something is and how it was used. To harken back to another term we've tackled in the ABCs, microware analysis gives us clues as to the formation processes of an artifact. And of course, this is most commonly relevant to stone tools, but we can apply this to loads of other stuff, like bone, as in that bear bone story from Poland, or wood, or teeth, or shells, seashells, or even textiles. Now, of course, this requires powerful microscopes, so this kind of analysis was not really a thing until the middle of the 20th century. So at that time, enter Russian archaeologist Sergei Semenov, and in 1957 he published a work revealing that you could look at the microscopic surfaces of stone tools, and that's what he was studying, prehistoric stone tools, and you could identify very minute polishes and striations that gave hints as to their use. A couple decades later, Ruth Tringham poked some holes in Semenov's analysis by focusing instead on microflaking. That's the minute chipping that occurs when something like a stone tool is manufactured or used. And then the real leap forward happened with the advent of the Electron microscope, because that really allowed for very high quality imagery of very, very small surfaces. And then along comes Lawrence Keeley, who, armed with his electron microscopes, published his seminal work in 1980, Experimental Determination of Stone Tool Uses, a Microware Analysis, in which he was able to analyze microware with a much greater degree of specificity. Through his methods, Keeley was able to identify traces of tool use on the following 6 mediums: wood, bone, animal hide, meat, antler, and non-woody plants. So he was able to get very specific. He was also able to determine the movement of the tool, such as scraping, piercing, chopping. And perhaps the most convincing part was he was able to pass a blind test by manufacturing some new tools, and they were used by other people in a certain way on certain medium. And in most cases, Keeley was actually able to correctly determine the use of the tool and what it was used on.
Master Robin! Oh! You lost your arms in battle! How terrible! But you grew some nice boobs.
Blinkin', I'm over here.
Oh.
So hard to argue with that, and therefore this led to the same 3 steps being used on all sorts of materials from all time periods all over the world. Step 1. Observe the artifact up close and personal with advanced microscopes, microphotogrammetry, and other advanced imaging techniques. Step 2. Compare your findings with past observations and use those to hypothesize about what could have caused the markings you're finding. And step number 3, using your hypothesis, conduct an archaeological experiment using a replica of the tool in question and see if you can replicate the same sorts of markings you're observing. And if that doesn't get you to the right answer, rinse and repeat. And as I mentioned, this is exactly what was done to that radius bone of the bear found in the cave in Poland. And this type of analysis, as I mentioned, has been done all over the world, giving us previously unimaginable insights into the chaîne opératoire, and the formation processes of artifacts, basically their lifetime. And I could go on forever because there's so many great examples of this technique, but let me just pick one of my favorite examples from a site we've seen a few times already, and that would be Vindolanda, that fort up on the Hadrian's Wall where we found our supposed Roman wooden dildo. Well, if you recall, at that site, multiple layers of building of the fort created anaerobic conditions that were really good for preservation of organics, so a lot was found. And a lot of what was found were the remnants of shoemaking. And if you recall, something that shoemakers totally did in that day and age was moonlight by making sex toys. Yep, that's another story. So a lot of the artifacts that were found were shoes and pieces of shoes which were well preserved. So our researchers took their trusty electron microscopes and they observed very closely the insole of a child's shoe that appeared to be almost like in mint condition. But when they looked closely, they found that the insole, which was made out of a heavy fabric, was actually quite worn. And they were able to tell that because fabric, textiles that are worn from use have, when you look under a microscope, what's called brush-ins, these wiry sort of brushy ends that come from the fabric getting stressed. So what they figured out was that the Romans would sometimes make shoe soles, the insoles in shoes, out of old garments, heavy cloaks, for example, stuff that used heavy fabric. So this was an early example of recycling. Genius. Also in the same study, they found a leg bandage buried in the ground, so a bandage for somebody's wounded leg. And they wanted to know whether the sort of damage they were looking at was simple decomposition from it being buried in the ground, or again, use, that it was used in a prolonged fashion and then wore out. And they, with their electron microscope, actually found plenty of brush ends, which means that it was used for a long time. But they also found evidence of decomposition. So they actually got pretty good insight into the formation processes for how this artifact came down to us. Pretty cool, huh? Anyway, I think you get the idea. Microware analysis can reveal some pretty amazing stuff to the modern archaeologist. So that's M for microware analysis. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.